You're on.
Right. Okay, so this is basically, we're trying to give you the real deal on templates. So there's really, when you look at it, about 3 kinds of developers. Microsoft, when they were designing their Visual Studio, classified them as Mort, Elvis, and Einstein. So Mort is your opportunistic developer. He likes the quick working solutions for immediate problems, and he'll go and he'll just hack something out whatever way he can to get the job done. So Mort's going to get the job done. It's going to be brutally ugly how he gets it done. It'll work for now, and it may not work in the future. And anyone else coming out is just going to be going and cursing Mort if they have to try and figure out what it was he was doing. Einstein, on the other hand, he's going to think about the problem, study, might even create a few attempts at solving it and throw them away. He creates those attempts just to throw them away, by the way. And he'll come up with some magic thing that does everything in one go, in one fell swoop, and is a thing of beauty to behold. It's not going to be brittle, but who knows whether it works? Who knows how it works? Who knows what it does? Einstein, if you are dealing with the Einstein developers, you basically have to let them keep control of whatever it is that you've got them to do, because they're the only ones who understand what it is they've done. And then there's Elvis, the pragmatic programmer. He likes the long-lasting solutions that are simple to understand, that should be future-proof, and should be something whereby somebody else can look after it when he's done and moved on to write his next hit song or whatever it is. So the whole point is that Elvis, if he's managing a Jenkins instance, he loves templates. It's quicker than writing a plugin. If he updates the template, all the jobs that are based off that template are updated. And by using templates, he can stop Mort and Einstein from doing all sorts of crazy things. And in the context of this webinar, we're trying to get you to understand that you are Elvis. Sometimes you're Mort, sometimes you're Einstein in different program domains and different problem domains, but when you're in Jenkins, you are Elvis. You want it to be easy to get your jobs set up all the one way. You want it so that all your jobs keep the sameness where they can, and that updating to change a configuration applies to all the jobs in one go. So that's what you want, and that's what templates gives you. So the best way to illustrate how templates work is to actually use it. So first thing is to make a builder. So let's say you have a custom way to release stuff. So you know the story, you need to do a whole bunch of random steps to get, which everyone gets wrong every time. So you want a simple build step which will appear on your screen and under the build section as, say, release software, but you don't want to write a plugin for that. So that's where the build step template comes in. It allows you to add in a build step. You haven't written a plugin, it's easy enough to do, and it's quite simple really. So let's take a demo of that. So if I go over to a Jenkins instance, and let's say I'm going to go to templates, I'm going to create a new template, and I'm going to call this release software, and it's a builder template I want, and I'm going to go here, and let's say at this stage you get to the template configuration screen. Now you've got some pieces of information about the template that you have to provide. So the display name is what actually comes up when you're instantiating the template and you're adding it as a build step. And then the description is the help. So let's say releases the software to the FTP file share, or whatever it is. You've got all sorts of fancier bits about templates that allow you to have templates inherit from each other and all this sort of stuff. We're not going to worry about that for the moment. We just want a simple template. We're going to add an attribute. In this case, it's artifact. We can say it. Let's say that's a text field. There's a whole pile of different things you can select in here, but we'll just pick a text field and we can add another attribute and we'll say it's FTP server. And again, that gets you that. And then what you can do is you can define your shellback script and you can say, let's say it's FTP string artifact, or in that, I'm going to change it to FTP artifact string FTP server. So that could be your release command, and then maybe there's some other things you've got to do, like you might have to send mail and so on. You can put all those commands in. I'm going to shortcut all this and just go with echo FTP. Put that in there, close that, and I'll change this back to server. So I create that, and then we go Jenkins, and I create a new job, and I'm going to create a freestyle build, and we call it project foo. And we go in here, and further down here, we can add a build step. It's called release software. And now we get the attributes that we added before. So I can call this bar, and the server is 10.0.0.1. Let's say save and build that. Unless I've done things very wrong, it's saying FTP foo bar 10 dist foo bar. So if I'd actually got the appropriate commands in my environment to actually go and do what the FTP or whatever, it would have transferred that. And you can build that as complex or as simple as you want. We can take another template. So we can create a new template for a builder type, and let's say it's standard Maven build. Let's call that one. And again here, I'm going to do this one as a Groovy template transformation. And let's steal some text, which I prepared earlier. So I just put in some XML. So this is the XML that gets instantiated for that template into your job type. And I save that one. And create a new job. Build a freestyle. And we'll get some code. I hate pressing enter too soon. And then here, we'll go with a standard Maven build. And there's nothing to configure in this case. Save. And if we build that now, that will do what I've configured in the XML snippet, which is a standard Maven build thing with targets clean verify and using private repository no and using default settings and global settings and so on. And that you'll see gives us our standard Maven build. So that's how you do a build step, and that's the kind of things you can do with a build step. So you can capture that and you can make things as complex as you like. I could have, in this case, actually strung together several build steps using the using this template configurator in various different ways. So I could have created something that was kind of an aggregate of the whole. So that's build steps. The next template that you can move up to is the make a job template. So you're going to have jobs that differ in a few aspects. Maybe it's the location of the source repository, or it's the location of the deployment service, or multiple branches of a repository. And you want to talk in the user's language and can shield them from the complexity. So the big problem you have with jobs is that no two jobs are the same, but they're not that different either. So let's go with the demo of job templates. So the best way to create a job template is to start by creating a sample job. So I've created this sample job here previously in my cookery school tricks. So I've given it a Git repository, I've given it all sorts of things, I've put in some build steps, I could put in some post-build actions and so on. Let's add some in just to and we'll record fingerprints, and we'll say fingerprint archived artifacts, because that's a thing to do. And we can build that job again, just to make sure that it builds. And so that job is building off, doing all its standard fun stuff. Does its standard build, and we'll know at the end where I've got it just right. So we go and create a new job template. Where am I? Wrong link. Template. New template. And we say standard Maven job. This is going to be a job template. Let's see, did that job finish yet? Still going. All right. So I'm going to assume that it works. So for a job template, there's an attribute you have to have, which is called name. We can add an attribute, and let's say we'll have heterogeneous component from descriptors. It's going to be a bit more funny. I got this right. I can't do this on this particular one, so bear with me a second. Right, so I'll leave that for the time being. So let's go with name. I'm going to add another attribute, and I'm going to call this one user. I'm going to give it called GitHub account. And we now will take the sample job, and we're just going to load that in. So that gives us the XML that was used there. And so what it's done is it's gone and taken the config XML for the sample job, which worked, thankfully. And it's copied it in, and it's done some of the tricks that are needed to turn it into a bit more of a sample job. I'm going to change this to be string account. And I'm going to go with string name. And that should be fine. The rest of that is all okay. Let's save. And then we have that job template. So I can create a new job. And let's go with a standard Maven job. I'm going to call it JSZip Maven plugin. GitHub account is JSZip. So that's all you have to do to configure this job. Fill in the name and the GitHub account. That's fine. And we can build that job now. And there it is building. And it's doing the exact same thing that we had before. It's going and pulling out all the bits of information, and it's checked out from based on that. And we could pick a different repository. So in the interest of GitHub, let's go pick a different repository that has a standard Maven build. What one's a nice one to go with? That one looks nice. eaio.uuid. Let's go here. Jenkins, new job, standard Maven build. Call it eaio-uuid. GitHub account. And we can build that one. and you'll see it's going and checking out that repository. Instead, I'm going and doing the build of that. So you can see how job templates are really nice and handy. You may have other bits that you want to do, and that's where this heterogeneous descriptor stuff that I did before comes in. So if we load the prototype job, load that in. Now let me see if I can capture the bit I'm after. I'm going to have to scale down the screen. There's the one I'm after. So now in this particular case, I should be able to configure this one, and now we can go with the fancy Maven job. And hit OK. And now we've got source control, and I'm going to pick if maybe it's Subversion, or maybe it's Git, or maybe it's CVS. And so we've got all the same standard controls that we had from before, but we're now able to go and configure that little bit that we wanted extra. And similarly, you could create a template which allowed you to add in build steps after you've got the bits that are standard for your particular job template. So there's a lot of power that you can get in templates, but the trick is to start simple. So let's see how complex we can actually push this, because, I mean, they're in some ways kind of just scratching at the surface, and hopefully I've given you a hint of how you can apply templates in a way that allows you to actually get something close to what you're after. But let's see what we can do if we take it all the way and push it to the limit. So in this case, I'm going to use a sample organization. We call this one CloudBeers. It's, I don't know, we just came up with the name. So they have a requirement. They're saying all their projects are built with Maven. And by the way, although I've used Maven in my template examples here, templates are not restricted to Maven. They work for every build system. It's more just that it's easier for me to show that it's a real build if I use a build system that is easy to set up, and Maven happens to be that. All the projects for CloudBeers are hosted on GitHub. Every project has an owner, and every project will have 2 Jenkins jobs, a build job and a test job, and only run the test if the build passes. So this being CloudBeers, we want to use templates to make sure that the developers who've been sampling the product a bit too much don't make a mess. So how do we go about doing that? So let's bring the screen back up again. So what I've done is I've created a couple of templates. I've created a standard build job template. So this is the same as you'd have your other build job templates like I created before. I've got an attribute name, and in this case, I define a promotion process, which allows us to use, in this case, the promoted build. So I define the promotion process. When the following downstream build passes, test, trigger, even if the build is unstable. You can configure that, and I tell it the action is keep that build forever. And then I have a transformer which goes and does various different bits. The bits that I've done that are sneaky here is I've gone with $parent instance GitHub, which you're going to see come about a bit later. And this one's $parent instance GitHub again. So there's a couple of places where I put these parent instance expressions in, and that's basically referring to the template that's instantiating this template's actual configuration properties. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a folder which has 2 jobs in that folder. And when you create the template, when you create a folder using a template for that folder, you're going to also create the two jobs. And those two jobs take their configuration not from themselves, but actually from the folder template that they belong to. So by using parent instance, I can reference that property there. And then similarly, I've got a standard test job. There's nothing exciting there in that. It's the same as the other one. Just the exact same stuff that you get, and only this time we're doing a different set of things. We're doing some copy artifact to copy the artifact from the build job and link things together to give us the downstream promotion. And then finally, where we get fancy is we have a folder template. So this is a, let's just see the CloudBeers GitHub account. So we've got an advanced and a basic project. The advanced project has some stuff in there, and the basic project has some less stuff in there. So that's that, and if we have a look at this template. So in this case, we have the display name, the description, which you'll see on the build job type. We have the name, that's the name of the project. We have the owner, and in this case, we've defined some predefined options. The owners can either be Kasugi or myself or Jesse, and that's the owner of the project. And then we have this git_url, which is a computed value and happens to be git, GitHub, CloudBeers, name. So in this case, name is referring to the name attribute. So this becomes, in some ways, even easier to configure. And then finally, we've got our Groovy template. So again, we've got the same set of things before, the config.xml for the folder. We've copied in the bits. We've configured it appropriately to go and set it up the way we want that folder to work. And finally, the initial activities, we create an item called test. There's a CloudBeers standard test job. And then we create an item called build, that is the CloudBeers standard build job. And the reason we create them in this order is that the test job is referenced by the build job in the promotion process, and it's a bit more stable if you have it so that you create the things that are depended on first and then the things that actually depend at the end. So that's that CloudBeers GitHub project. If we go and create a new job, I'm going to go with CloudBeers GitHub project, and I'm going to call, well, actually, we're dealing with developers that are a little bit prone to mistakes. So I'm going to create a folder called GitHub, and I want to restrict the kind of jobs that you can build there. So I'm going to take all these ones off because they might pick the wrong type of build job. And I can configure using, for example, our ORBAC plugin. I could configure it so that you can only create jobs if you're one of the developers in this GitHub folder. And it doesn't have to be called GitHub. It could be called whatever we wanted to call it. So at this point, we can do a new project, and we can say we want this one. I'm going to call it basic. And the owner in this case is me, let's say. And so now we've got this created for us, which build jobs, build and test. We can kick off build, and that's going to start building. So you can see it's checking out the basic, doing clean verify, skipping the tests. It's all hunky dory. Now it's triggered a test build a test. So we can now see that build a test is being triggered. That in fact has completed. And if we go back to basic, so we see the two builds, and hopefully, if I set up my templates correctly, downstream build has succeeded, so it's actually completed the test pass promotion. And for some reason, that is probably just I did a copy and paste error in setting up my template, and it's just failed to assign that. But anyway, in any case, it's actually met that criteria, and it's just a question of getting the promotion process configured correctly. So you can see how you can take templates and push them all the way. If we go back here and we've got a new project, so In this case, it's called advanced. And again, and in this case, the owner is Kasuki. And if we look in this case, if you look here in the or back, we've actually got that the owner is Kasuki. And if we look in for basic, if we look at the groups, the owner is me. So we've actually defined the role-based access for that project from the template. So you can see that we're actually making everything a lot more locked down, and we've left it with very little configuration options for the user to have to get confused over. Now, you may not be able to take it to quite this level. It may be that there's certain things that you have to leave open for people, and again, you could have used that the exact same stuff like we did in the fancy Maven job type, where we add in a heterogeneous. So it could be that, for example, in the folder template, we add in some attributes of a heterogeneous component from the scripters, only one instance, or from the scripters allowing you to add multiple ones. So you could actually add in a set of build steps, or add in a set of some other job steps, deployment steps, or whatever you want to do, and have those be build steps and have those part of the build job. And it's just a question of instantiating them appropriately and giving the class name in there. So that's kind of that. I don't know whether or not you think I've got declared victory on Jenkins and the complexity with templates. Well, I certainly think I have. At this point, I am obliged to tell you a little bit about some of the other Jenkins Enterprise plugins. So we kind of categorize them into three kind of categories. We've got those which are aimed towards people who are dealing with large installation, things like folders, folders plus, templates, which the backup plugin, high availability, we've custom update centers, we've validated merges, and we've plugin usage, which allows you to see what plugins you're actually using and allows you to then basically stop using plugins you're not using. In terms of security, we've got our role-based access control, our with text, and the secure copy plugin. And then for people who are using VMware Slave, we've got auto scaling for VMware scaling for installations. We've things like the throttle build execution, the even load strategy, the skip next build, and fast archiving. So those are the kind of plugins that we have for enterprise, and we're always trying to think up of new ones and adding them into the mix. So at this point, I think we're finished, Alyssa, if you want to stop recording. But thank you for listening. We're going to move over to the Q&A session if there's questions. And here's